Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Aurelian, co-organizer of the CTM community. Tonight, we have the pleasure to host Diego, an old co-organizer and also a speaker. I will share screen in a sec. Okay, wait a minute. Do you see my screen, folks? Diego, just say.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so as usual, we want to thank our sponsors, Sauce Labs, Chewy Amusement, and Trending. And as a reminder, our website is still available for all the events online on off-site we have on www.continuoustestingmeetup.com. If you are interested even to participate as a speaker, feel free to reach me on our Slack workspace. Again, in that website, you will find the link. And today, what we are going to talk about is Docker, UI testing, Selenium with an expert as Diego. Diego, board is yours.
Cool. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Diego. Just let me, I need just a couple of seconds to get my setup ready. And 1 second. Okay. This seems to be more tricky. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen first. Let's see if this works. Okay. You are gonna see just a desktop for now.
Yep.
But now, hopefully, you see the slides. Is that right?
Yep.
Great. So, all right, let's get started. Hopefully, this goes smoothly and all good. Perfect. I'm just getting my. I haven't done an online presentation in a while, so that's why I'm a bit rusty. Anyway, this presentation is called Fast, Cheap, and Portable. The idea of it is to share, from my point of view, how Docker has made UI testing easier, more accessible for everyone. So that's the main point of it. If you see, so the slides are the same ones I used it for the Docker conference back the beginning of October, so a couple of months ago. And I just wanted to share this because some people commented in LinkedIn that they couldn't really access the videos. I think you have to register in Docker and then go through some different, like filters. And I just thought this is based on an open source project. And the idea is to share with you all, something that is valuable for the community and usable for all of us. So let's get started. I am Diego. I am the open source program office lead at Sauce Labs. I'm also one of the tech leads in the Selenium project. I am one software engineer who just loves testing. I've been in tech for around 15 years. To be honest, the main motivation for this talk was to a bit show how the first open source project I started with, which is docker-selenium, has improved my career. And today, this is what I want to share. So that's kind of the gist of it, because when Docker was making the call for papers, this is what I just wanted to share, like how Docker has made UI testing easier, more accessible, and better for everyone. Good. So let's continue. First of all, I want to share the talk overview. To start with that, I want to talk about the development challenges you have when you are developing a web application, and together with that, like the challenges you have to test that web application. the idea to share or to talk about these challenges is by sharing some examples with you all. And then we're going to jump to understand what workflow we follow usually when we are developing web applications. And if we start doing testing from the beginning, supporting ourselves with a tool like Docker, in theory, we're going to have an environment and setup that is ready to work with DevOps, so like running things in CI and potentially using this test as a gate to approve or deny deployments via continuous deployment. After that, I'm going to share some extra features these Docker images have. Yeah, I'm going to wrap up. I'm open for questions for all of you. If you want to, you can already write in the chat, like different questions that you have. I'm just gonna try to move this from the screen. I hope they're not seeing the chat screen. But anyway, let's move slowly forward. So first of all, dev challenges. So what's the idea of it? So let's think about it in this way. I understand that the video might be too small for you, but the idea is that, okay, you're coding a web application and you want to run the tests before pushing your changes. So what happens is that you're making a change, you just start your application and then you go to a different window to run the tests. But then before you notice, you're seeing like all these browsers popping up, like running tests. And the problem with that is that you cannot continue working because you just have to wait for this test to finish. So this is already a very annoying thing for you as a person who is running tests, because like you're just useless in the sense that you cannot use your machine anymore. Even if you have like an extra screen or extra monitor, the browser steals the focus the whole time. And to make so the gist of this is that this development workflow that you're following, it's just being slowed down. And what ends up happening is that you're just changing context, which is very expensive when you're developing either an application or when you're writing automated tests. So years ago, before this project, docker-selenium started, there were several workarounds to avoid this browser focus, which is the thing that doesn't let us, interact with our machine to type or to open new windows. One thing was that you could like create a virtual machine with something like VirtualBox, for example. One of the things is that you had to have like the browsers installed, the browser drivers installed. You need to have like, I don't know if you were using Python, then Python properly installed, or JavaScript or Java. And the thing is that you had to keep this VM running while you were developing your application or your tests. And usually running something like VirtualBox was very, very expensive. You needed like certain amount of gigabytes of RAM and space, and also a well-powered CPU. And you also needed to maintain these VMs. Like every time there was a new browser, you had to go like, if it was a Windows machine, like to Windows Update, or if it was an Ubuntu machine, same thing, and so on. Another option that people were using were headless browsers. I don't know if some of you used something called Phantom.js. Phantom.js was a browser made tons of years ago, like over, I think almost more than 10 years ago. And the idea is that it was a browser, but headless, right? You also had something called HTML unit, which still exists. It's a browser that can render pages. Yeah, I'm also showing my age here. When I also use Phantom.js a couple of times. So yeah, you also have HTML unit, which is a project that is still very much used, for example, for scraping, because it's a browser you can drive with Java, and it renders the pages in memory, it has low consumption, and it's very effective when you want to just scrape different websites. But in the end, what happens is that these are not real browsers. And if I want to make a longer parenthesis here, this is still happening today when people are using the browsers that Playwright provides, for example. People are using WebKit to run automation tests when those browsers are not being used by your users. Same thing with Firefox, it's a patched Firefox and things like that. So we were using browsers that were not real, that, and when I say real, those were browsers that are not being used by our customers or by our users on their machines. So that was another workaround. And then the third workaround was, have remote execution. So something like Selenium Grid or a cloud execution like a vendor. But the thing is that when you had this shared infrastructure, like maybe you had a few virtual machines in your company, then the thing is that this was a shared resource. Like if you were different development teams and when you were running tests, maybe if the other team had a release, you were having like some bottlenecks because it's just not enough resources to run everything all the time in every single commit. And sometimes when you had these remote environments, well, you had the application running locally, probably, because the idea is that you want to test that everything works in the test you just wrote or in the change that you're doing to the application before actually making the commit and pushing, because if you commit and push, then you just let the CI handle it and you have to wait a bunch of time, like 10, 15, 20 minutes. So if you were using a remote execution environment like Selenium Grid, you had to configure the network so the grid could actually access your local host machine. So it was a bit of a mess. And then what happened there? So the challenges were that you needed to have everything all configured. So there was a complex setup, either with remote execution or with VMs. And this was very expensive, not only because we needed powerful machines, not only because we needed infrastructure and like time configuring different environments, but mostly because we were stuck. Like we were forced to switch to a different context. And as hopefully you all know, switching context is one of the most expensive things in software development, because when you have the mindset, when you already are like in what people call like the flow, it's really, really complicated to go back to the same state when you switch to something else. And one of the things that people tend to overlook is when you hire people and they join your team, you want to make them productive and feel valued as fast as possible. So if you have to tell them, yeah, like if you want to run tests, go and like build your own VirtualBox machine or like run tests and just sit 10 minutes looking at them. So that was very slow, because one of the best things to learn how an application works is by like looking at the tests. And together with that, well, it was hard to have consistency across different environments, because maybe the browser you were having locally installed was Chrome 118 and we were testing with 120 in the shared environment. I don't know if you have seen 120 came out with some bugs. So anyway, so having the same environment in different places, like my laptop, your laptop, the CI/CD, the developer, the other tester. So that is key to actually have a process that works for everyone. So what happens there? This is when UI testing met Docker. This is when the project docker-selenium was born. The project was born around July 2014. And the thing is that it was actually born by coincidence. So I met the person who created the project. Is a friend of mine called Leo Gallucci. He's Argentinian, and Docker came out. I think it was like 2 years before or so. And he was working in testing. He was doing testing for like remotely. He was working in Argentina for some American companies, and he was very curious, and he just wanted to put everything into Docker until he thought like, why not put a grid inside Docker and see what happens? And then people were interested. People were seeing the value of this, and they started to grow the project, like adding things like, okay, why don't we add like a live view, like with VNC? Why don't we add some video recording, and etc. etc. So he created that, and it became so popular that the Selenium project reached out to him. This was made an official project, and I was lucky to meet him and work with him for a while, and that's how I got started into open source. The main idea of the project is to enable developers and testers to execute this browser automation in a simple way. So they don't need to rely on shared environments. They don't need to rely on complicated environment configurations and so on. So I don't know if it makes sense for me to explain what Selenium is, but in short, Selenium is a low-level library that helps you automate browsers in a standardized way. So it works in all browsers, from Chrome to Safari, and covering everything. And then, as a way to scale up those executions, Selenium Grid was born, which is a way to run those tests in a remote way. And what Docker Selenium is doing is putting a Selenium Grid inside Docker containers. This project has the popular browsers like Chrome, Edge, and Firefox. It doesn't have Safari because Safari only runs on macOS, and you cannot redistribute macOS just like that. And if you want to run, so actually macOS, the operating system, is free. You don't need to pay for it, but the licensing says that you can only run macOS on Apple hardware. So we can just not pack macOS in a Docker container because you actually need to run that on Mac hardware. Otherwise, you could be exposing yourself to some licensing issues. So that was a parenthesis about Safari. Yeah, we also have VNC and video recording. So there are a couple of videos that demo that in a moment. So this is already an improved experience, right? Because here, I'm just gonna try to, okay, play. Because the thing is that you're able to basically put everything in a Docker Compose file. Like you can have like your tests, the web application, and the browser in 3 different or more images, start those containers, and run everything together. So in this case, I have a to-do application that I can see it there because it's running like on the same environment, and I am running tests in the Selenium Grid. So I have like several browsers available. I'm running some tests, and for example, I can see how each session is getting created in the grid, and after that, I can go and see how each test is being executed. So yeah, this is basically how it works. So in this example, I'm just like starting up the environment with the grid and the application, and then I run the tests. And if I go, well, I can see how sessions are being used, and then I can actually see as well how the browser is being automated inside the container. So in short, this is a much better experience because you could put everything together in a single command. You don't need actually to open the browser every single time, or you don't need to open the grid UI to see everything. You could just run a command, execute a command, run everything locally, and just wait. Usually, you could wait maybe like 2-3 minutes until everything done. Obviously, this depends on how many tests you have and how extensive they are, but normally you should have like a little amount of tests that are like your smoke tests telling you that everything's okay. But yeah, this is the idea. So from having an environment that blocks you because you cannot do anything else, now you have an environment that you can run something and maybe do other tasks or continue developing tests as you go. So there is a simple way to start containers. If you want Firefox from or Edge, then you can go and well, this is having a release that was back in October, so 4.13. Today we're using 4.16.1. So yeah, my bad for not updating those slides, but you can always go to the repository. So GitHub, Selenium, HQ, Docker, Selenium, and then you will always see the documentation pointing to the latest stacks. So yeah, you can start the containers just like that. But this is like a standalone mode, so you have everything in one single container. So the grid and Firefox, or the grid and Chrome, or the grid and Edge. But you could put everything together in the same network. So you could start a hub, which is like the main entry point of the grid, and then you could have different nodes connecting to it. And this hub is like a balancer, sending requests depending on what you need. So you could have like, yeah, everything together as I showed you. So in the repository that Aurelian shared, you have all the Docker Compose information to do it in a single line, which is the recommended way of doing it. Or you can also try things by like typing things on your terminal. There is something that was developed somehow recently. I don't know if you have heard of Docker desktop extensions. It's like a very simple way to start containers. This extension is out there. It's working in some cases, bugging in some other cases. It was a contribution from the community, but the point here is that you can try it out with that. I'm pending to contact the creator of this, and so he can translate that to me. Transfer that to me, and then we can properly maintain that in the future. Okay, so we have covered a few things. The first one is the challenges, and then we have also covered like a way to go over those challenges, but we haven't really spoken about what's the usual ideal state of the developer workflow. So now we know the challenges. What's the ideal status of a development workflow? Even if we're like developing application, or if we're developing just a set of tests. So the idea that we should have, that's kind of my recommendation, is that we want to have an environment that is quickly brought up and then thrown away with a single command. That I don't want to have compatibility issues. For example, I don't care if the node version you have installed is 18 and the node version I have installed is 20 or 18 or 16. I should not care about that. And I just want environments that are easily reproducible, right? And with that, I just want to avoid having more costs, because then I have a unique way of running my tests. This means that you are sharing knowledge by putting, by documenting the way you run tests in scripts. And you also are running tests in a concurrent way, which is extremely helpful when you want to speed up your development process. More than that, the tests will end up being portable, because you write them once and you can execute them in a container in your machine, in the CI/CD environment. If you're working in a QA and developer type of setup, then developers can actually execute them without the need of installing everything that you need to have. So this is also a big plus when people are joining your team. It's a pretty simple onboarding. It's like, clone this repository, run this command, and everything is already out there and executing. What else can I share? Yeah, one of the key things is that this is a workflow that we want to continue working while tests are being executed. We don't want to stop what we're doing until we just wait for results. So I'm gonna just show you a few things that would emulate what a developer is doing while developing an application. So if you check so all this code that I'm gonna share and the examples and the Docker files are in the repository that Aurelian is sharing. So if you want to check that afterwards. The first step, obviously, to have everything working in this proposed workflow is to have everything inside Docker. So we can start with the web application. Obviously, this is a very simple application. This is just to show an example. But in this case, we are following, like Docker best practices. For example, we're using a supported and widely used image like the Node 18 Alpine. Well, actually, I should change that because in the conference they said Alpine is not really that recommended. So I will update that. But then you are doing things like in the third line, you are copying the dependency files first. So in every language, you have a file where you declare your dependencies. If you're using Java, Maven, it's a pom.xml. If you're using Python, then it's normally requirements.txt or this new structure of, I forgot the name of the new structure that is very similar to what JavaScript does. So if you have JavaScript, then you have like the package.json and the package log.json. And then basically, pip file is the one that I was looking for. So then you install your dependencies while only having your dependency files. So what the files where you declare the dependencies. And then you do like actually copying everything afterwards. So you expose the port and you declare this is how I want to run my application. So 3 things. The first one is having the web application inside it. If you have an API, obviously, then you need to have an API inside a Docker container. So every component of your application in a container is the ideal part. So that would be like step number 1. Step number 2, we want to have our Docker, our tests inside a Docker image as well, because we want to put everything in the same environment and to avoid, differences between execution environments, which is something that often happens. So in the repository that I'm sharing, you will see some tests, sorry, and the idea of them is that they're written in Python. They're testing this to-do application, and you will see there's some good practices for Docker. And here we're gonna see, for example, in this is the 5th line. We're also copying the pip file, so the file that declares the dependencies for Python. Then we install them. And we do something in the command that says wait for grid. And a small parenthesis here, when you are running Docker containers, what you usually have to be paying attention is that if a container has started, this doesn't mean that the service living inside is ready. It's a common practice that, for example, you start a database inside a Docker container. But a database takes a moment until it reads all the files, it figures out if the port is open. So it takes like a few seconds. So you cannot use the database right after the container is up. The same thing with a Selenium grid. The grid takes a moment to identify if there is a browser installed, if the browser driver is configured, to connect to the hub, to report back. So it takes like 2-3 seconds to be up. So if you run your tests before the grid is up, your test will fail. And what this script that is in the repository is doing is to say, wait until the grid is up, and then you run your tests. And after that, we copy all the tests, all the detailed files, and then we just execute them. And, before, in the previous example, I shared how you could like run a Selenium grid in a Docker Compose file. So something cool that is happening in the recent versions of Docker Compose is that you can declare what you want to run, but also include something else from a different file. And in this case, you could say, start the grid and start the to-do app with all the declaration, like this is the Docker file, and the Docker file is living inside the sample web app. These are the ports, Python test, and so on. So this is all the information you are declaring for the application and the test to be ready and be executed. And if you see in the first line, this is how you can run things. You can run like docker compose, up, and you have a flag at the end saying abort or container exit. And this is pretty important because when you run your tests, if you have, let's say, 10 tests, and when the last one finishes, then this means that the process for the Python tests ends, and then the container exits. And when this container exits, the whole stack will be brought down, which means that while you're like still developing or doing things, then your tests are being executed, and then you can see the console if everything went fine or not. Maybe let's see just a brief example of how this looks. Basically, what you're seeing here in the video is that you're having this Docker Compose file, bringing everything up, and then throwing it away at the end. And the cool thing is that with a configuration file, you're having consistency across different teams, different environments, different developers, different testers. So everyone is doing the same thing, or everyone is following the same structure to execute tests. In this case, we are executing, I think, 8 or 10 tests. I don't remember exactly. No, we're executing 8 tests in 3 different browsers. So I think around 24 tests. And in total, we needed like around 20 seconds to bring the infrastructure up, execute tests, and then bring them down. Obviously, this depends on how many tests you have. And this is another long story for a different presentation, which is like, okay, testing strategies, how many tests you should have, how many tests you should execute at different stages, and so on. Right, so the important thing here about this approach is that we're having consistency across different environments. And this is leaving us with a configuration that is ready to be used in DevOps. So we can use it in the CI pipeline already. And if we're having a structure where we are running tests as a gatekeeper for deployments, then we can use that as well in that environment also. The thing is that also something that is important that I haven't mentioned is that it happens very often that you run tests locally, right? And they pass. But sometimes you run tests like in Sauce Labs or in your local grid, and then they fail. And one of the cool things of putting everything inside Docker is that it's consistent. The execution speed is consistent, so it happens. So the pass rate should be the same one as the pass rate you use in your CI, and that's something that is valuable and sometimes overlooked. In general, you want to do UI testing and continuous integration because this is just speeding up the feedback loop. So it's nice just to commit and then push after running your test locally, or if you're in a rush because maybe there is a bug fix that you need to push quickly, then you already have a setup that is reliable. You put it in CI, and then you are running the same test you would run as if you were locally. And this is just avoiding all the difference between your local environment and what you have in the CI/CD system. Which also helps to simplify debugging, because if something fails in the CI/CD system, it should also fail locally. And in the end, one of the key things about all this type of focus or approach is that the way you run tests, the way you build tests, the way you integrate them with the application and the system under test is that everything is scripted. There is no command that you have to type manually in a way, except the first command that says docker compose up. Everything is in a script. So you're sharing the knowledge that shows how you can do all this together. And in this way, if you're using Jenkins or if you're using Bamboo, but in this example is just GitHub Actions, what we were doing locally was to write Docker Compose and the file, build, abort the container, all this. We were doing all this, and this is exactly what we have to do when we're running in a CI/CD environment. which is already very nice because you are building slowly all the steps and configuration you want to have for future phases of your development, because you start locally, you run tests, you commit, and then you want to use the same setup for CI/CD. Obviously, one of the things that might be overlooked here is that in this very simple setup, we're seeing how time can quickly add up. Because in my case, if I run this locally, well, I have the image built already, so I don't have to pull the Python image again. I don't have to pull the Node image again. But most of the time in the CI/CD environment, this is not cached if you're using something like GitHub Actions. And that's something that you might need to consider when getting into this. So my first run didn't take like 3 minutes. It took maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 minutes with just 10 tests. And this is because your execution was depending or was having a bunch of dependencies that need to be cached before. So these are things that you need to plan when you're moving to CI/CD. But if you have your tests configured in a nice way that are easily to execute, then those are like less things to worry about. Right, so this was the workflow, like the workflow that it would be ideal. I know it's ideal, like it's not possible in some cases, but it's something to think about or to look forward, because it's a way to execute tests in a unified way. So let's move forward to the different extra features that we have in Docker Selenium. One of the cool things is video recording. Until a few years, this was an exclusive feature that cloud vendors had. Like you could only get this in Sauce Labs or the competitors. And we worked to make this, available for the community, because not everyone can pay something like that. And eventually, people would like to see how their tests were being executed. So this is actually bringing more, like when you want to see a failure, this is pretty interesting because you see like what happened in the test and etc. So we have a feature called dynamic grid. And the idea of it is that you have a container that will receive a request. Let's say I want to run a test in Firefox, and based on a configuration, it will look for the Docker image that has Firefox in it, and then it will start that container, it will run the test, it will record the video, and when everything is done, it will throw that test away and save the video locally. So that's why you see that we have some volumes. One is the assets, that's where we're going to store the videos. We have a configuration that we can map from our local configuration to whatever is inside the container. And if you're running under a Linux environment, it's easy just to mount the Docker socket, which is basically the way the container is talking to the Docker daemon to create and start and stop those containers. The configuration file looks like this. Most of this file is just comments, but the idea is that you have this config section where you say the Selenium standalone Chrome .413 etc. is mapping to this configuration, to the browser name Chrome and the platform name Linux. And you could extend it, like you could say, I know that 4.13, the image that was released on September 26, has Chrome 117. So you could put another one that has Chrome 118 and start building your own grid with different options over there. And the other two are just configurations telling like Docker, if you want to, Docker client, if you want to talk to the Docker daemon, this is the URL you have to use. And the video image that will be used to record the videos, that's the image you will use. So if you want to have a look, the workflow in CI would be a bit different because for some technicalities, the way Docker mounts volumes when you're in a Linux environment they are mounted as root, but this has been fixed in the last version of docker-selenium, released 2 days ago. So this is good to have in mind. But anyway, the idea is that when you are copying files from inside the Docker container to your host, you had to make sure the permissions were fine. And this is what this GitHub Actions workflow is taking into account when you see like create assets directory and change permissions. But anyway, the part that is important is the next line. So run test with Docker Compose. And we are using the video images and all that. And you can share, I mean, you can see the link on the repository that Aurelien has already shared a few times. So let's have a look to see how that ends up. To reiterate, yeah, like it's helpful for debugging. And one of the things that I found, videos are also useful when you are like building a new feature and you want to find a nice way to show how this feature works to the rest of the team or the rest of the company. So it's a nice way to build videos for demos, for example. And yeah, like sometimes I heard stories where a developer doesn't believe that a bug exists. So you have a video to prove that there is a bug indeed. Yeah, something to note here is that the start time is taking longer because we start the main Docker image and we're pulling also images for the Selenium, for the Firefox container, for the Chrome and so on. So what I'm doing here in the video is like I'm downloading the zip file that has all the executed videos, and we can see basically how things go there. If you see the workflow failed because one test failed, which is completely normal, but then you have a way to figure out what test failed, and this is how it looks like. One key thing about this approach is that running with video takes longer because you have to create a container and throw it away, and etc. etc. So yeah, what about Safari and the rest of the operating system? So sometimes you don't need to test with Safari because maybe your user target is not using Safari as much. So you should always check what the market share for your application is, what the user demographics are, and all that, right? But obviously, if you want to, there is a way to plug in cloud vendors to the grid. And in this case, you could say like, hey, I have my Docker configuration with, so locally I can test with Firefox, Chrome, and Edge. But if you want to extend this, you could use like Sauce Labs, or you could use also the other vendors as well, because this is just a configuration of the URL where your cloud vendor is. So maybe you could like plug Safari, and you can plug maybe some emulators, simulators, and so on. And that's also a nice extension that this project has. Yeah, so if you want to see this, well, it's kind of the same idea. I fast forwarded this to see how it looks. And now I am just running tests in locally in the different browsers that I have, but also I'm using Safari to test in Sauce. So yeah, like this was just fast forwarded. So this is another neat feature that the project has. What else do we have? Yeah, we have more things for you all. If you're running in Kubernetes, for example, we have a Helm chart that is being well maintained. So if you want to orchestrate your grid in Kubernetes, if you want to scale it up, we also have an integration with a plugin called Kida that basically reads your queue. So how many tests you have on the pipeline, and then creates pods, and so like a dynamic grid, but in Kubernetes. Grid also has observability via OpenTelemetry, so you can plug your internal observability tools to it and see how your tests are performing on every single request. So to start wrapping up, this tool has around 9.5, 10 million spools per month since November 2014. we're happy to be sponsored by GitHub, like using their tools for free. And it has a decent amount of stars, 7,000, but it shows that we have a like solid and a good user base. This is an evolving tool. So the first time this tool was shown in the Docker conference was back in 2017, where these folks showed there. And the first time it was shown in the conference, in Selenium conference, was in 2015. So when this was shown, it didn't have like even like half of the features that we had now. So to prove that this is evolving, I guess you may have seen that we have now like MacBooks, like the M1 and 2, which have like the ARM architecture. So we are developing in parallel a forked project, which is the docker-selenium. And the idea is to provide these images as well for these architectures. The challenge here is that these images are based on Linux as well. But the problem is that there is no Chrome binary for Linux on ARM. So the same thing for Edge. So we're providing some things, but it's a bit challenging in this case. And yeah, so open source is driving innovation. So we saw that teams are reporting full automation in general, 47%, and the tools they use mostly is in CI/CD, they use between 6 and 10 tools. One of the interesting things that we saw in the Docker conference is that so tools want to help developers to analyze security, faster build, and so on, but there was a gap in testing. And sometimes when we see that we want to scale up those tests, having local Docker containers is not enough. So that's why, for example, different companies are working on something like this, which is like, for example, Source Orchestrate, where you can like take your Docker configuration, your tests in a Docker container, and you can just send them to Source and run those tests in Source to avoid latency, less load on your CI/CD, so you don't have to maintain big machines for CI/CD. And the idea is that you will see everything in a nice dashboard, all unified. So the way it works is that, you can either have it remote, like talk to Source every time a command happens, or you can put everything in a Docker container, send it to Docker image, send it to Source, and then everything gets executed there. All right, so to wrap up, how Docker improve testing? Well, the developer workflow has been improved. You can share tests between teammates, teams, environments, and there is a reduction in the cost because not only we need less machines to do all this, but we also need less time to do all this. And in the end, building up on this type of approach, it's leaving us ready for a set of DevOps approaches and practices. I think that was it. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I'm sorry it took like a good 45 minutes for this talk, but yeah, it's a lot to share, and I hope you all get something usable for your testing journey in the next days. Thank you. Should I start like reading the questions, Ariel, or do you want to do that?
These are mine. I just put for
Okay.
others.
Good.
So one, it was about the video in your example. I'm not sure to understand how is it working. Are they stored in the Docker container?
When you record videos with the Docker images we have, the video we're using FFmpeg, and that video gets recorded. So the file is on the host where everything is running. In the example I was showing, it will be on the CI/CD machine. So in GitHub Actions. And then you have to figure out, if you're using GitHub Actions, how to download that file. So they have like some actions to upload the file and then have it as an asset, and then you have to download that manually. But if you use things like Jenkins, it's much easier. Like sometimes you can actually see the video right in the same CI/CD system. But yeah, the file ends up on the host where the tests where the Docker images, where the Docker containers were being executed.
Okay. And yeah, another question is more about people that may have some problems, that's younger or people with less experience. What do you think about integrating Docker? Shouldn't this can pose problem in terms of challenge? And if any, what advice or recommendation would you give to these people to facilitate their onboarding?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think Docker is not really made sometimes for pure beginners, because if you are getting started in testing and then you want to learn testing, but then you have like a ton of tools that you have to learn, and this is very complicated, because let's say you want to get started in testing, and then you decide somehow that you want to do UI testing. And then the next step is like, okay, people are asking themselves, which tools should I use? And now you have like Cypress, Playwright, you have Selenium, you have Web.io, and many things on top. So that is already a burden. So I think that, so Docker is always a useful skill, but I think if you're getting started, you should focus on like learning how testing has to be done, like what's important to test, so a bit of testing theory and strategies, and then focus on like one or two tools. Like if Docker is too much for you, then maybe don't add it to the mix. Just focus on the programming language and the framework you want to use, plus learning how to test, I would say. Yeah, so I don't advise to use Docker from the pure beginning if you are just getting started in testing, unless you have previous experience.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, to complement the answer, it's because like I've seen many people bump into issues because the container inside it's almost like a complete new machine. So you have like to understand networking, you have to figure out, sometimes you have to do a drawing, what's happening inside the container, what's happening on the host. And I think that's too much overhead. And I think there is an easy way to go through that without learning the basics.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other question, guys?
I'm also happy to talk about anything related to testing, Selenium, anything that you might think that could be interesting. Doesn't need to be only about the talk. Are people writing things in LinkedIn? Maybe they're writing questions there.
Check.
Can you share? Okay, so there is a question. Can you share more insights on upcoming features on this project? I think the next feature that we are going to focus is making the ARM images work better. Sorry, because the problem is that someone was starting this effort, and like they had to take a break because they were moving to another country and so on. So we left that project a bit unmaintained. So that's very important, because a bunch of people are getting new machines, like new Macs and things like that, and they cannot use the regular images because they just don't work, because it's a different architecture. So that's one of the things that we want to focus. And the other probably feature that we want to focus is to maintain better the Helm chart. So a lot of people use this for Kubernetes, and we just didn't have the time to work on that. And we were very lucky that recently someone joined the project, and they're helping us with that. When that is more stable, I probably think that we're gonna focus again on finding ways to, like you're recording videos, you're having logs and all that, like finding ways to have some sort of a dashboard. Like hopefully someone from the community can start the idea, because it would be nice to like execute those things and then have a dashboard that you can use for like visualizing all these videos.
We have two other questions, one from Alex and one from Carlos.
Should I read them, or do you want to read them?
Do you want to read them,
Okay.
guys?
Sure, I can read it. This is Carlos. So I was wondering if the images, these Docker images, we have to update them when there are newer versions of the browsers.
I mean, I cannot answer that question for you, because in theory, you should know the answer, and let me explain why. Because hopefully you should be, or we as testers, we should be aware of the regular browser versions that our customers are using. So for example, like some people use Google Analytics, and they know, okay, what Chrome versions are my users are having installed, and then you should, like, okay, maybe figure out. But something that is healthy is to use like a tag to know what version you're using. And another thing that we recommend to do is that so since like maybe 6 months, almost a year, we're providing the beta versions of Chrome, Firefox, and Edge, and the dev version, so you can already test with browser versions that will be released like in a month or 2 months to see if everything works. So it's hard for me to tell you, like, yeah, like you should update, because it really depends on what you're doing as a tester.
Right. In our case, our approach is always to test with the latest version of Chrome. That's why I was asking.
If that's like your decision as a team, then yeah. But I would always use I wouldn't use like latest as a tag. I would use like the specific number, because in the last, from the last 10 versions of Chrome, I think 1 or 2 had bugs that were blocking people, so they had to wait until like a patch was released, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
There is another question from Alex.
Hi there, shall I go ahead and read it out? Thanks for a great talk.
Sure.
So I'm moving from being a functional manual tester, right, which I've been doing for many years, and I'm making some quite good progress with Cypress, and I'm wondering whether Cypress or other test frameworks are embracing this Docker image path that you've been telling us about. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Specifically with Cypress, I believe that is true, because I'm not aware of that, but I have checked a few times, and it's not really possible to execute Cypress on a remote browser. So you need to have the Cypress test next to the browser, so on the same machine. So from that point of view, I've seen people using, I don't know, using like a Docker image already made with Chrome or whatever they need, or whatever Cypress supports, and then copying the test inside the Docker container for that purpose. So I don't know if it's like a strategy decision, but it's mostly like the technology makes you follow that path, because there is no other way to execute Cypress tests. And if you check, like, for example, the cloud vendors like Sauce Labs, that's the path they suggest you. Like, you should like put your tests in a place that they can be like uploaded somewhere and then be executed next to the browser. So I think implicitly that's what you need to do because there are limitations on how the test can be executed.
Thank you, that's great. Just wanted to agree with you on looking at the statistics of actual real-world browser usage to determine your test targets. And there's some surprises there. And it's a good thing to talk to stakeholders about as well, so that you know, everyone's on the same page. So good stuff, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback.
Any other question, guys? There is another one from Carlos.
Yes, hey Diego, I was following your idea on that this could be a very good approach for onboarding new people to the automation team. And I was thinking, in order to do that, should we be creating custom images, like customized for our companies or our product, or should we be using the ones online directly?
Yeah, that it depends on the company, because I know tons of people who use our Selenium Docker images out of the box, just because they don't have concerns. I mean, they are being scanned and they seem fine. And when we get some report about security, we try to fix it quickly. I think you need to customize the Docker images you will end up using for your application or your tests, but more in the sense of like having the dependencies installed beforehand, so not waiting until you build the image to have all dependencies installed. So not like running in CI and then writing the command to install dependencies. Yeah, I have seen several companies that, so when they report an issue, you can see that the image they're using is like a copied image to their internal repository, and they make some changes because they need to add like certificates, or they need to add like configuration files for whatever environment. So I think it depends on the test environment and the company. And some companies cannot just pull directly from Docker Hub because they have like security constraints.
Okay, thank you, Dio. Also, previously, someone asked you about where were stored the recorded videos. So I have a similar question, and it is about the downloads. I know Selenium, or the goal of Selenium, is not to test downloaded files, but sometimes we just need to validate that the file was downloaded. I don't care about the content. I only care that when I click on the button, the action happened and the file was downloaded. In that case, how does that is verified with Docker?
Yeah, 1 second, let me look for a link, because we added that to the grid, I think maybe 6 months ago, and I just need to find the specific link. Okay, so here it is. Yeah. So several people have been asking that question for a long time. And before, we didn't really add that feature to the grid because most of the time you could download the file by like using an API. But these days, the way modern web application work, sometimes you cannot really see the API. That file is the result of several things that the web application does. So you cannot really download it like that. So we did that. So if you follow the docs, you will see that there is a way for you to like download the file remotely, and you can query an endpoint that will get you the list of files that have been downloaded. And then you need to figure out, because if you're downloaded with Chrome, then you always have like this extension of like dot download or something like that. So you have to be querying the endpoint to see when the file name is like actually the file name you expect.
Thank you.
Sure, happy to help.
All right. If there are no other questions, I will share screen myself. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Diego. Super nice presentation. And I wanted to first, because it's the last meetup for 2023, to say in advance a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all the people. And don't miss out the next event in January with a great tester about API testing, Bas Diskra, sorry. That will let us know more about API automation in C# and rest assured.net. Don't miss out. Thank you very much, guys, for joining. Thanks, Diego. See you next year.
Thank you.